Hello everyone, welcome to another live hangout here at Voice Essentials. It is so good to spend the next, probably work out to be about an hour with you. I hope you've had a great weekend. I hope you are safe and healthy wherever you are. Don't forget to leave in the live chat over here. Look at that, I got it right this time, went the right direction. Don't forget to let everyone know where you're from and what the weather's like in your part of the world. It is always good to have new people in the live chat. Of course, if you are watching this as a replay, welcome also. It is always very humbling to know that so many of you tune into the show, not just live, but also watch it as a replay. In fact, around about 1,000 people, between 500 to 1,000 people every week now watching these live hangouts, and so thank you for taking the time to tune in. I really do hope that the information we bring you here on the channel is of a quality that is encouraging you and your voice and your vocal development. I know today's show is definitely going to do that because of our guest, Dr. Brian Gill, who I will introduce you to in a moment, is like uber awesome. So we'll get to him in just a second. Before we do, let me just give you a few housekeeping things to let you know that the Voice Essentials online course, which you can see sort of scrolling down there, I just wanted to update you. For those of you who may have been sort of wondering what's been going on, we've been updating some things in the online course to let you know that now we've just doubled the access from 6 months to 12 months access. Not only that, you can now download to keep all the MP3 files that are a part of that program, as well as the lesson sheets. So in one sense, you kind of get virtually the whole program that you would need to continue your learning. We're hoping that the 12-month access is, and this is in direct response to many inquiries we received and people telling us that they would love to have a little bit more access than the 6 months that it was originally set at. It is now 12 months. Of course, the reason it was originally set at 6 months is because we want to encourage you to complete the course. There's no sense in just buying the course and letting it sit there and collect dust. You've actually got to do the work. So that being said, we do want you to finish the course. So start it to complete it, but equally, hopefully now that you'll have a little bit more access, it gives you opportunity to go over the course a number of times, which you can go back and restart it. In fact, you'd have time to do it 4 to 5 times, the 10 modules. So hopefully that is an encouragement to some of you who have been thinking that you'd like to start the course and get into it. So that's something that we've done. Hey, also just to let you know, our next live hangout won't be now until Monday the 29th of April, Australian Eastern Standard Time, 2 p.m, because next week is my studio teaching break, so I won't be teaching, and if my wife has her way, I won't be working at all during that week. The following week is, of course, Easter Monday, and so we won't be doing anything on that day, and then after that is when we'll be back, the 29th of April. And so I'm looking forward to doing a live show with you. Hey, also, just to let you know, a few weeks after that, Melissa Cross will be joining us from Zen of Scream. She'll be joining us on the show. And she had disappeared there for a moment, but she's back and she's really excited to be coming onto the live show. So that'll be sometime in May. Keep an eye out for that. I'll let you know more information as the time comes along. So, as we always try to do, try to keep the housekeeping to an absolute minimum when we have a guest as wonderful as Dr. Brian Gill available to speak with us. We are going to be introduced to him right after this.
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
G'day, Brian. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm good. It is a real pleasure and privilege to have you on the show and joining us for what I know is past midnight for you.
Good night.
No, I know. My guests, you people are so awesome to come onto the show at these crazy hours. I'm really, Australia misses out on hosting a lot of international events purely for television rights because no one in the Southern Hemisphere can watch them at the same time. And it's the same with my live show. Most people are going to bed while we're going live. Thank you so much for availing yourself to join us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Brian, why don't you just take a quick moment just to tell us a bit about yourself and what your bag is.
Okay, well, I am a huge fan of voice. So my voice has become I should say my life has become voice, but see how I reversed it? My voice has become life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's what I'm all about now. And I have been incredibly attracted to the idea of longevity and sustainability and things. So I've joined forces with the science world and trying to find a way to demystify this wonderful instrument that we have. So I'm currently with the Jacob School of Music in Indiana. Bloomington, Indiana, lovely little college town. And before that, I was in New York City for 12 years at New York University.
And right on screen right now, we've got your website. There you are, looking bold.
I know that guy.
You know that guy. Tell us a bit more about this mindful voice production, which I love the name Mindful Voice.
So I am a believer in mindfulness and the power that it has to change people's lives. I use mindfulness and mindfulness meditation that I discovered from a man named Thich Nhat Hanh. And with the mindfulness meditation, I've been able to overcome panic attacks and other anxiety-related things, and also be able to control other emotions. And so, yeah, I've been a huge fan of it. And all it is awareness in the present moment of where you are, what you're doing. And I think that really applies to any kind of training. And so I bring that into voice training.
It's so important. In fact, it's a turn of phrase I use a lot here in my studio about with my students, wanting them to be mindful, to be in the instrument, in the moment. It is such a powerful tool. We probably
instead of worrying about how is someone going to perceive my voice, or how will I be judged, or instead of worrying about that, just focus on the beauty of producing sound and communing with people.
Yeah, communing with people, which resonates so strongly with something that we're constantly talking about here on the channel, and that is that singing is about communication between human beings, and first and foremost. We probably should declare our history.
Our sordid past.
Our sordid past. We, of course, we met each other last year at the ANATS, the Australian National Association for Teachers of Singing. Oh my goodness, that is such a long mouthful. At the ANATS conference, the National Conference for Teachers of Singing here in Australia, in a beautiful part of the world called the Blue Mountains. Everyone, including myself, complained about having to trudge all the way up to the Blue Mountains. But once we were there, it was absolutely gorgeous. And of course, we met there, but then we had the great privilege, I say that tongue-in-cheek, of sitting on a panel together discussing, of all the topics that we could possibly be on a panel, discussing belt. And I think I'm trying to remember the tagline. It was a very controversially stated framing, wasn't it, from memory?
Yeah, absolutely. Can
you remember?
I can't remember the tagline either. No, something about Yeah, but what is, yeah.
Yeah.
What is
Anywho, I was telling you before, and I'll tell people who are watching the show. My decision with that panel was to be as quiet as I possibly could and only speak to when I was spoken to.
I still haven't learned that lesson.
I even sat myself way down away from the chair, Deb Fireland, who is a mutual friend also. And today, what I wanted to talk about with you is because it is a controversial subject, isn't it? We're going to talk about. We've got a few things I want to sort of go through, but given that the last time we kind of had an interaction on a professional communication level was around the subject of belt, I thought that's where we could pick up where
Sounds
we
good.
left off. Why don't you talk me through how do you define belt? That's probably a good place to start, because I think the way you define it then informs how you would then teach it and where you would place it.
To allow me to be cheeky, my favorite definition is something that keeps your pants up. But I think that I honestly, yeah, I find belt, it's so confusing now that in a way I just hate the term. I look at belt as it's an aesthetic. It's an aesthetic, and it's the way a voice comes across that has a heightened, urgent, kind of on edge sound to it.
Yeah.
That alerts the listener to some intense dramatic event happening.
Yes.
And that's the main thing. But then how it's produced is, I mean, probably the most important thing for us trainers and us our performers as performers. So that the more interesting part, though, is how could you, the various ways you could produce this aesthetic. And that's where it gets really, really complicated. So if you want, I can go into what I think.
Let's do it. Let's throw caution to the wind and let's do it.
Here we go. So first of all, I think we have to first look at what's happening at the vocal fold level, and of course we're dealing with the contacting and decontacting of vocal folds. Also, we have to look at the vertical mass of the vocal folds, and so they contact if they're thick. They'll fly apart at the bottom and then at the top, and then come together at the bottom and then at the top. So just because of that motion, they have a longer contact time.
Yeah.
So oftentimes that's a configuration that's chest voice or lower mechanism or mechanism
M1 or short and dominant.
And it's fine. I think anyone should have their vocabulary as long as they can back it up with physiological reality.
Yeah.
But we're dealing with contact time and vertical, and that includes vertical mass. And then we're also dealing, in my opinion, with the amount of airflow that's moving through. Yeah. So from a functionally sound position, when more air is making it through, the vocal folds have to be in a particular configuration. A prephonatory glottal width, as Dr. Ingotitsa would say. It's a position the vocal folds start in that makes them vibrate in such a way where more air moves through during the open phase.
Yes.
And both Johan Sundberg, Dr. Johan Sundberg, and Dr. Ingotitsa and others have found that with professional singers, more airflow is what is found. Usually 2 to 3 times greater peak flow than untrained singers. And so I think we should be looking at that as the gold standard for our voice training. Now, a lot of belt studies include people who do belt without a heightened flow. There's where we get into complications. Now, most of the studies that I've read have also included in a fine print on the bottom that all of the participants had some type of vocal fold abnormality. So I've asked the people who present those things, including Dr. Sundberg, to highlight that fact. Because are we learning from people, or do we want to learn from people who have just entered a career or have had a whole lifelong career?
Yes.
And do we want to learn from people who have avoided injury versus have an injury? Not to shame anyone who's had an injury. No. But I think we do need to take that into consideration. So the heightened flow for me is a key component to knowing whether or not the vocal folds will have a reduced friction and therefore
Yes.
greater sustainability.
It is.
So,
You raise a point that has always been one that I have had when I'm reading papers on subjects like belt, where they say, and we, the study group included, trained singers, and it's such a subjective, like, trained by whom, and for what, and
exactly.
and I. In fact, in the panel that we were on last year, you made a point that I didn't, because I was observing silence, I didn't have the opportunity to jump in and agree with wholeheartedly, was where often we're still in a place in our understanding, I think, around voice where we don't have a lot of longitudinal studies. Where we don't have the opportunity to actually see, okay, well, yeah, they're doing that for 2 years in their 20s. Fantastic. What is going to happen to the voice in just even in 10, 20 years? Is the voice able to sustain that?
Yes, exactly.
And that's the studies that we don't have, isn't it?
Absolutely. And and as practitioners, most of us, I mean, I engage in research and have publications, but most of our time is spent with our clients,
Yeah.
day in and day out. And I can say anecdotally that I've been a part of and teamed up with many voice centers. I was actually on faculty at the New York Voice Center.
Yeah.
The NYU Voice Center, and then have teamed up with other folks like Dr. Lucian Sulika, who's at the Sean Parker Institute. And when you share clients for me, but patients with them, you start to see common themes with injuries. And so then anecdotally speaking, every person that I've met that had an injury, I, as a practitioner, would trace it back to the fact that they engaged in pressed phonation. So they had a lack of understanding of the outcome of having too long a closed phase with too much driving force behind the air.
And is that where you tend to land anecdotally? Is that's typically what's bringing about the wear and tear?
Absolutely. I've said in many talks that I gave, one talk I gave in front of Dr. Sundberg, and well, many talks I've given in front of him, but I said we currently live, I believe this was for the Swedish Rustforum, and I said we live in the era of pressed phonation.
We do,
and it's in every style,
yes,
opera and music theater and pop. And I think that in a way, we have to be the adults in the room. It's not just about the aesthetic, but it's about how it's being delivered. And so I think, back to the original question, I think that we need to find just the right amount of boost from the vocal folds, combined with a resonance enhancing configuration that gets the aesthetic across and minimizes the impact of friction on the vocal fold level, and also minimizes impact forces. And
I could not that you need me to agree, but I could not agree more.
Thanks.
It is, often when I'm reading papers and I'm not engaged in research to the level that you are, or the frequency that you are, but I do I do have the privilege of working alongside ones like Di Hughes, Associate Professor Di Hughes, who you know,
she's awesome.
And we do joint papers together on occasion, and so when you're looking at research papers in reflection to that, you always have to team that up with your anecdotal experience in the studio, and sometimes, and I'm pleased to say it's not often, but sometimes what I'm reading does not line up with what I know I'm seeing in the studio day in, day out.
Absolutely.
And what I'm seeing in the studio day in, day out is exactly what you've just expressed, is that we do see, we are in an era, I like the way you've put it, we are in an era of pressed phonation. where we've got this really high subglottal pressure, which is causing this closed, high and closed quotient, which long phase.
Yep.
Yeah, it is a challenge, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. This leads me down the road to wanting to be more mindful of breath flow and breath patterns, breath management. There are some people, and look, you and I haven't talked about this, so I'm being very game here by opening this as a topic, because I don't know what you think, but I'd be interested to know what you think. There are some people of repute who don't believe that breath management is an area that should be looked at specifically for singers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, I disagree. It's one of the subsystems, so it's involved in, so breathing. I'm
now breathing a sigh of relief, Brian.
No, but it has to. I can see how if one micromanaged only that and not how breathing's related to phonation and resonation, articulation, that it could be an exercise in futility.
Yes.
But I do think it has to be discussed. It's the power source,
yes.
the driver of the vocal fold vibration. So how one uses their body to do that is of the utmost importance.
Absolutely. Yes. Yep. I am relieved to hear you say that. We agree.
This could have gone really.
This could have gone real bad. I did take a risk. Never let it be.
We're having technical difficulties. We've lost Brian Gill.
Never let it be said that I don't take risks on my live shows. That was a big one, everyone. A big risk, because there are people. And I want to be respectful to this, because some of these people who are big names, and they say, don't, especially in the contemporary space, don't worry about breath. You don't need to, if you're just natural, everyone should breathe naturally. My response to that has always been, natural? What? Natural? My body doesn't do anything well naturally. I have to train it to do everything.
Many people's bodies don't do things well naturally.
And I acknowledge that there are some blessed human beings on the planet whose bodies intuitively seem to do things naturally well. But I haven't met many of them. Very few of them have ever stepped into my studio. And that's where it comes back to this anecdotal idea that what I see happening in my studio anecdotally sometimes doesn't line up with, the studies of trained singers who,
Yeah, I agree, and I think that my quest in the demystification of voice includes trying to figure out why certain people believe what they believe. And I think to give a shout out to folks who do believe that, even though I agree with you, I think that they've seen perhaps the destructive nature of training breathing as something absolute and super specific that everybody has to do the same way.
Yes.
And that's definitely not true. And there's so many studies that show that now, that people breathe differently depending on where they carry their weight.
Ectomorph, endomorph, yep.
Yeah, and so it could be that, and maybe that's giving that line of or that approach too much credit, but I like to think of why they might want to de-emphasize breath. But I have seen also areas, in particular styles of music, and again without naming names, of very well-known people who say this style of music, they don't use that much breath. Now, having trained in, so many different styles now, wide ranging, and for heavy metal, that's where I got my start. And now I train some heavy metal singers and rock singers and Indian classical singers. And I have not found a style that doesn't benefit from having greater energy at their disposal for whatever task they're about to engage in. So it's I think it's important that we also look at not necessarily a habit of like the let's say natural habits of people, but what makes it completely sustainable and what gets them through when the fatigue factor is there from a tour, you know, and having performed night after night and not slept in your own bed, and you know, it gets really difficult. And so I think having a bit more of an embarrassment of riches of breath energy can be advantageous. So
Yeah, no, great balance to the conversation there. Can we just? I'm watching the time, and I don't want to get too excited on any one given topic, because otherwise we will have you up until the wee hours of the morning as opposed to just the early hours. Another topic of conversation, and I know you've got some good thoughts around the velopharyngeal opening. So everyone, that position between the soft palate up into the nasopharynx. Brian, what are the acoustic effects? What are you? Because we hear people talking about you know, the soft palate and the pharyngeal space and those sorts of things. Maybe give us a rundown on the benefits of that, or how do you see that space? Because it's another contested area of understanding.
yes, well, we just published a paper on this with myself and Johan Sundberg and Philippe Alain and Jessica Lee, and we actually looked at the acoustic differences between a lot of velopharyngeal opening, a little bit, very slight, and a no velopharyngeal opening. So I can tell you.
Please do.
If you have a spectrum, and this would be the low end, correct? Am I doing the right hand? From your visual, low end, and then high end spectrum. Yeah. Okay. So when you have a no velopharyngeal opening, you get a good boost of low end information. Now this is backwards for me, so it looks really funny. So I hope this should be towards the low end of the spectrum when you're visualizing. And then, but you get very little boost in the high end information. When you have a lot of velopharyngeal opening, you get a decline in low end, the warm part of the spectrum, and an increase in the high part of the spectrum. When you have a slight velopharyngeal opening, you get a boost in both. So you get more energy throughout the entire spectrum, both in the low and in the high. So if you're looking for, it depends on what kind of information you're looking for. The second part of the study that's not quite complete yet is going to talk about what happens at the vocal fold level, you know, at the same time, because that's another interesting thing. So we have some info that we'll share in an upcoming article on with EGG or electroglottograph. It tells the contact time. So
some acoustical reflex of sound traveling back down the trachea, back down the throat.
This will just tell what's changing in the contact time.
Okay.
So again, then you could kind of guess: does it make it a more even vibration or less even vibration? Does it keep it a more consistent sound source from top to bottom, or a less consistent sound source? And so that's going to be interesting to uncover. So far, a little teaser: it looks like having a slight velopharyngeal opening actually keeps the sound source more consistent from bottom to top.
Yeah.
So
I do. I'm about to take another risk. This is a show of risks.
Careful, Dan. Careful.
I'm careful.
We did so well.
I'm nervous. I'm nervous.
I'm going to take a drink just to make sure. Hydration is key.
The reason I feel like it's a risk is I really do respect what you think, and you are so well regarded here in Australia and abroad that it matters to me what you think. I do teach the idea of being able to increase that, lift that soft palate. What are your thoughts around the ideas of lifted soft palate?
Yeah, I think it can be hugely advantageous. You know, I think it depends on the individual, but certainly a overly lowered velum. It is important to note you could have a lowered velum but close off that area.
Yeah.
So
Yes, because it can.
toyed with this. So if you look in MRI, it could be down but closed.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing right now,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
no information
Yeah.
goes to the nose.
Yeah.
It could be more raised and closed.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing right now. It could be, any point. So it's always dependent on the acoustic you're looking for. I think in general, a slight raise is good for balance of timbre.
So I'm now no longer in the risk category because another phew, we're on the same page.
Keep teaching that, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask then, what are your thoughts around? There is especially here on YouTube, there is a big drive towards this idea that you cannot learn to lift the soft palate. What are your,
Just look at the eyebrow.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can learn to do anything.
Okay.
For the most part, it's about increased proprioception.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. You have to have the big difference between, again, trained and untrained musicians is heightened proprioception.
Yes.
And so again, it depends on the teacher, what they want to highlight for the student.
Yes.
I tend to I want a person to be empowered by knowing great detail about their instrument and how they produce their sound.
For the sake of those people who are watching, can you unpack that proprioception word for everyone? It's certainly a word that my students are very familiar with, but people may not be aware of that sense of kinesthesia that we need to develop. Can you talk us through that a little?
Yes. So you have two things. You have kinesthesia, which is the awareness of movement of limbs in your body and relative to other things, and then you've got proprioception, which is the awareness of the stimuli that arise within the body.
Yeah.
And so for sure, you can train a person to understand whether their vein limb is down and open, or down and closed, or up and closed, or up and open. You can train. I mean, I've trained myself to do that. So you can train people to be aware of incredible detail. I would go further and say that you don't always have to train people to have awareness of certain things with that great specificity, but I do think that in the case of velopharyngeal opening, while it's not a set thing and you wouldn't use the same amount in every area of the voice, it is something that I think every singer should be aware of.
Yes.
And just try it out for themselves. And we're dealing with 8 millimeters of opening. And when it is that much opening, there are studies that show that it does not come across as nasal.
No.
So I think that, again, we need to understand. Now, to train that takes time.
Yes.
It takes mindfulness.
It really
over
does.
time.
Yeah, I find that it's an area that actually seems to take many singers longer to train than other areas.
Yes.
It can, and this is where I think some people, especially here online, and these channels and people, singing teachers online will remain nameless, but I think that's where the mistake is made, is that if the person can't do it immediately, then that's because it can't happen. Well, no, this is actually an area that takes quite a bit of time to develop for most, anecdotally in my studio, for most beginner singers, because there is such a low proprioception at the back of the throat. Learning to zone in on those very subtle changes and then connect them to the right sounds in accordance to what you're trying to achieve. It's a challenging thing to do, and it takes time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember along the lines of what you said, it's actually some rather unintelligent proprioception in the beginning. I remember when I was sick, and I had an inflamed uvula, and it had swollen up, and I was sitting in my den, and I was just me and my wife, and all of a sudden I was convinced I was choking. and I thought something was in my throat down here and heading into my lungs, and I screamed to my wife and I said, "I'm choking, Kim." And she said, "No, you're not. You're talking to me," which was very supportive. And but then she came
Very
with the
intuitive.
flashlight. She came with a flashlight, and my uvula was so large it was touching my tonsil,
Wow.
and that cued to my brain that I was
That
choking.
you were choking.
And so I snored, and I didn't feel like I was choking anymore. And then it touched it again, and I said, I'm choking again." So that's how bad your
Yeah.
proprioception can be.
Can be.
And you have to retrain it. And then I was also, speaking of retraining, you will often get advanced singers who have been told to avoid any access
Yeah.
to that area. And when they do, in the retraining, you may have to go to a place where it ends up being a little nasal for a bit,
Yeah, right.
in order to then get them to reset their habits with their soft palate, retrain the velum. And so that absolutely requires that they not be around anybody who's too judgmental about the fact that they're not getting it so quickly, because they have to sit with this new awareness until their proprioception develops enough.
Yes. Yes. Oh, what is that? 3 from 3 or 2 from 2?
That's pretty good. Yeah. Let's say 3 from 3.
3
I like
from
that.
3. I'm not going to take any more risks. So I'm just going to quit while I'm winning. But we're not going to quit the show yet, because I want to kind of not deep dive, because we don't have time to deep dive, but really the thumbnail on today's video, which we haven't even talked about yet, is the idea of owning one's voice. And I think it does kind of the talking about proprioception and our awareness, our mindfulness, some things that we've already discussed in today's show, come to this idea of owning one's voice. It's not an uncommon thing, I don't think, for us to hear in our studios, particularly from beginner singers, but sometimes from very experienced and seasoned performers, that they don't like their voice. And so there's this disconnect, there's this sense of dissonance between them and their sound. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts around this sense of the voice and our connection via our psyche and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think that voice and voice use, I mean, it's tied in with so many different traditions, including meditation and healing. And I think that if a person gets rooted in a different direction, that's perhaps a negative direction with their voice, where there's too much judgment when they're younger or even when they're older, that voice use can become emotionally painful thing for them to do. And so I do think, as our job, part of our job as practitioners is to help the person reclaim just the beautiful feeling that it is to make a sound in speech and in singing. And I think if we focus on that, we can reignite their love for making sound, just simply for making sound. I did that myself when I found something called sonic meditation. Mm-hmm. And it was just, again, it was, you get together with a group of people, you start to meditate together, and then the out breath becomes sound, and you just listen to people around you and you react to their sounds, and it becomes this piece that has a beginning, middle, and end, and you really just start to enjoy sound making. And it's immediately communing with these group that you're with, and it's very helpful. So I recommend that to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I think once we get that place where they just enjoy making sound, then the more they investigate what is easy and effective and allows them to communicate with great nuance. If a person focuses on that and they find what's unique about their voice, they're empowered then to go around and find where that gets plugged in. And they will find a place where people really appreciate it. They'll also find a lot of places where they don't appreciate it. But what happens is we allow people who have a a little snapshot of our voice, we allow them to have too much influence in our vocal world. Instead of using our voice team and trusting our voice team and then shopping around to different places. So part of the empowerment and owning your voice is knowing how your voice works and knowing how you want to communicate and taking that out and shopping it around and finding the place where it fits in, and not overly reacting to any kind of negativity that you get. You also not overreacting to the positivity. You'll have some people who think you're the greatest thing in the world, and they may have ulterior motives. So staying true to yourself and making sure that you pursue the art form in a mindful, careful way.
Well, I just want to pick up on something you said a few paragraphs ago, and that is this idea of, often I'm encouraging people in a very similar manner to what you have just then, to seek out that which is unique about their voice, to celebrate that uniqueness. What do you find yourself doing, particularly with avocational singers who may not feel they've discovered that uniqueness, that thing that sets their voice apart and makes it theirs? What are you often doing with those singers to help them to discover and imbibe that uniqueness?
I think it really gets boiled down for me to functional elements and functional freedom of the voice. And I think that when you do uncover free, steady breath flow and a resonance track that is enhancing of the tone, that you end up setting the voice free. And with that, you end up with the person's unique voice print. That's the name of the NYSTA publication, New York Singing Teachers Association publication. And I've always loved that, a voice print. And that you absolutely are true to the uniqueness. The more tensions you have and the more people kind of do this number, you end up losing the voice. And you don't know who the person is. So I think our job is to strip those things away and ultimately introduce a person to their voice that will, the great news is, it will feel better to produce that voice. It will feel freer to produce that voice. And so then they are invited into a realm of, it's that easy?
Yeah.
It really, and it should be that easy.
Yes.
And and then they'll feel empowered to communicate, and most of their energy can go towards communication instead of, do I have the strength to do this today? If you find yourself in that point, then you're probably being influenced by the era of press phonation.
I love what you said not on the panel that we were in together, but I sat in on one of your masterclass workshops last year, and you made a great point, a point that I've made with many of my students over the years, but you made it with far more eloquence than I had ever, and that was that you were talking about the idea that so many young people are desperate to sound unique, yet find themselves ending up sounding like everyone else.
Yes.
And I'm not certain that I've done you justice by retelling the story. What are you? Can you? I don't know if you can recall that far back.
Well, I do. I think I do remember that, and I think it's ironic. You get these iconic sounds.
Yeah.
And it comes from an individual who's using the voice in a way that is natural to them. They feel like it just flows from them. And those are often the sounds that rise to the top of popularity.
Yes.
And then people crave that.
Yes.
But their reaction to craving that is to imitate that person.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait. That's not the recipe. If you really want that kind of freedom of expression and uniqueness of timbre, then you've got to investigate your path to unlock that.
And explore your own sound. Explore what does your voice, when it's free to be itself, then what sort of sounds is it producing? And obviously we need guidance in that, I think, because you can naturally find yourself creating very unhealthy sounds, and that may not be sustainable, but nonetheless, we do want to discover what is I made a statement actually in a previous ANATS conference, which created a whole heap of controversy. Where I said, I think we are at risk as contemporary pedagogues of sanitizing the voice with too much technique. And of course, that was, red flag to a bull, suggesting that I don't believe in technique, which is so far from the truth. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I do think, we do have to explore our own sound, undergirding it with great technique to then allow the voice to be free to be what it wants to become.
Yeah. Well, and I will often say that for me, technique is synonymous with mindful communication.
Yeah.
So you are aware of how you're using your voice in an effort to communicate. And if you want that to be globally understood, it needs to flow through you very freely. And the nuances that get picked up through the emotional center and things, it's magical.
Yeah.
But the more we struggle to produce a sound, regardless of the intention of the lyric and all, the more we struggle to produce a sound, the more it falls flat and is not globally understood. So we have to really understand that we are the vehicle for this information. We are not the information.
Yes. Yes.
So we have to be aware of what it is, but we're communing with the librettist and the composer and then all the players on stage. And you are this vehicle for this information. Even as in a rock band, you are the vehicle. When I saw Steven Tyler, one of everybody's favorites, I saw him at a concert in a television studio one time. I've seen him rock out and not get to see the behind the scenes thing. But this time I saw the behind the scenes. He was rocking out like the best of them, and just like going for it with no inhibitions, it seemed. And then all of a sudden he ducked behind a camera and he looked at his watch. So he was timing it because he knew that he had to be in control. It's a business and it's supposed to fit into a 2.5 minute snippet. And, so it looked like this unbridled, just rocking and letting go and forgetting everything. And yet he's checking the time, off camera. And I thought, this is what it's all about. We're performers.
Yeah.
This stuff is flowing through us and we're sharing with people, but you have to be aware of other things, including that you're going to fly out the next day and you're going to do a concert in the next city. And so
the dramatic artists, theatre people will often refer to that as the state of metaxis. It's that management of the real world versus the unreal world. That, the fact that you do have to get up the next morning at whatever, and you've got times to remember and those sorts of things. But then you've got this unnatural communication of things to communicate as well. We have nearly done our time. That
was fast.
It's been a lot of fun. There are a couple of questions here that I want to get to, and in fact, there's actually one question that I want to from my last week's show, which was just basically a Q&A show. And when this person asked this question, Susanna Mazel is her name, I said, "Do you know who's going to be the best person to answer this question?" Well, I can't get them, but I've got Dr. Brian Gill next week. No, I said you'd be a great person to answer the question. So if you can stick around for a couple more minutes, it would be awesome. And we can perhaps answer Susanna's question and a couple of other questions that are sitting there as well. We'll be right back after this, everyone. Okay, Susanna, don't say I never answer questions directly when I said I will. The question is this: can you address Passado and how it dictates your range?
That's a great question.
Isn't it?
Yeah, next question. No, kidding. So I don't think Passado don't dictate your range. No. They can, in my opinion, and should dictate your tessitura that you're singing in. So the typical Passado are areas of changes in vocal fold vibration based on changes of vertical mass. So from the lower transition of a female, you're going from this chest mechanism into a thinner, less contact time. And then the upper transition of the female voice, often called the second Passado, into the top voice is more of an acoustic thing. So in light mechanism or head voice. you're dealing with the first formant coinciding or being close to the fundamental frequency.
Yeah.
So where those things happen are governed by length of vocal folds and the length of the vocal tract.
Yes.
So the acoustics of the vocal tract along with the vocal folds, that's your instrument. So where these transitions occur can tell you what the instrument is and where that person should be residing with regard to tessitura.
Which brings up... Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say that then you get into altering sort of the natural mode changes of vibration of the vocal folds, and you get into using more contact time and delaying that lower transition and all those things. It gets a little bit more complicated, but as an instrument, if you're flowing very freely, there's certain points of transition that can be very informative with regard to tessitura.
And what I was going to add was, and this is the reason why, and this is sort of born out, this question sort of came out of some discussion that I was making last week, and that is, this is the way Brian just described all of that is in part why I am still a great believer in the idea that voice types, voice classification is not something that contemporary singers can just, disregard completely. You are born with a apparatus, a biology that is governed by your DNA, and just because you're a contemporary singer doesn't mean you can just throw that out the window and not observe those things. Your vocal tract is your vocal tract, and it's different to, a tenor is not a bass, and a bass is not a mezzo. It's, it's...
Exactly right. And honoring that gives you much greater chance of longevity.
Absolutely.
So you really have to figure out what is the instrument, what's happening at the vocal fold level, where do these transitions occur, and then start to go into other styles that make the changes happen in different places, but do it mindfully and figure out which groove you should be in, higher, middle, or lower tessitura.
And hey, that really speaks to the subject of today's video, as according to the thumbnail, that's about owning your voice. It's actually owning your biology. You don't get to be anyone else. You are you. Yes. You've got to own that. And
take care of you.
And be the best you can possibly be. But if like a colleague of mine said, you cannot walk in a viola and hope to walk out a violin. It doesn't work like that. Nope. You've got to own it.
And I've often said, the greatest and worst aspect of voice is its flexibility.
Yeah.
So, range is, I have mezzo sopranos, in classical music that sing up to B flat above high C. But it's where their transitions occur that tell me length of vocal fold, length of vocal tract. And they have a great upper extension. Same thing for sopranos. Some can have a very big low extension. Same thing with contemporaries. That's dealing with instrument.
Yes.
Same thing with contemporary singers. You've got this ridiculously crazy range, but how long can you stay up in the top or down in the bottom? That's more determined by the instrument at bass level.
We're 4 from 4, Brian. 4 from 4. No, that's excellent. 8. That's 8, my friend.
Oh, sorry, 4. I said, 4 from 4.
That's true. It is true. I stand corrected. Okay, Matt asks. We'll just do 2 or 3 questions here very quickly. Quick fire. When singing in a quartet, do you focus solely on your voice? Mine would be the bass, or do I focus collectively on all 4 voices?
You should both. You have to have some awareness of yourself, and then you have to have some awareness of how you're playing with the other people.
Yeah, great.
And they have a term called self to other ratio in choir studies. Oh. So how much self do you need to operate within a group? And every group should figure that out. In a quartet, it's a little easier. Yeah. You can kind of determine, blend a little better with a smaller group.
Legia, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How is pop pressed phonation if you are allowed to use microphones? How is pop pressed phonation if you are allowed to use microphones? And could resonance help people project more sound with less pressure?
Yes, yes to the latter. Resonance is the key to projecting sound with less effort, for sure. and using that sweet spot of contact of the vocal folds,
Yep.
not too much, not too little.
Optimal setting is the word, is the term I use.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and the first question is, it's quite hysterical, actually. Why, if you have the benefit of a microphone, would you ever press? Agreed. But there's an aesthetic that comes from using microphones and the power that the microphone gives you that makes people think people are doing more than they're actually doing.
It's all about perceived volume.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
And so you take a person off of a mic that's recorded in a recording studio or you've seen live, and oftentimes their voice is so much smaller than you could have ever imagined.
Yeah.
Yes. So I work with a lot of pop singers, and I'm always like, yeah, that's, compared to a lot of the opera singers I work with, it's a much smaller sound. And quite honestly, in a smaller studio, sometimes when I'm in New York, I go back once a month, it's a lot easier to teach than the cannons that may be singing at the Met. That's really hard if you get a small room.
Yeah, especially on your ears. St. George, one last question for St. George. The people's handles are great, aren't they?
Yes.
I have been doing this could be, feel free not to answer this question. I've just seen it's directed at SLS, so if we don't want to answer the question, you don't have to, but I'll say the question. I have been doing SLS exercises for a year now on a daily basis, speech level singing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And now I cannot push or belt chest voice, but rather mix by pulling down head voice to my chest. Is that a good sign?
Well, that's a good question. And first of all, I always say when people give shout outs to different approaches, you never really know unless you hear from a source that championed that particular approach, whether the person's actually doing what's been asked to do or not.
Yes.
So, my mentor, Barbara Dosher, would always say, you can't teach from a cookbook. Meaning, it's not about the exercise, it's about the application of the exercises. So I'd say that. But then the description that was given, now I'm not able to push my chest voice higher. That's tricky, because again, when a chest voice goes higher, it doesn't need to feel pushed. So it sounds like if you're not pushing your chest voice higher, then that would be a positive effect. Also, oftentimes when the chest voice goes higher in an easier way, most people think it's not their chest voice.
Yes.
Because their experience of taking the chest voice higher is it's so difficult, and that's the wrong way to take chest voice higher.
Yes.
Chest voice going higher, and just having, again, chest voice, it's another term. But
yes, I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, me neither. Having a higher contact time at a higher pitch level does not have to feel like you're lifting something, or squeezing your entire body to get the sound out. If it does, it's probably not correct.
Yeah.
And easy production at that level also does not mean that you are not in chest voice or lower mechanism or higher contact time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I would have said, I would have answered the question the same way. We do make the mistake of associating high chest voice with strain and stress, and it needn't be like that. And it comes back.
It can just be exciting.
We want it to be exciting and have energy, but it doesn't have to have effort, and that's it's learning to distinguish between energy and effort. That's the key.
And I'll quote my mentor one more time. She always say, we can talk about this, but give me a sound. And I was like, aha. Yeah, it's like comment on a particular sound is easier to do. You can say, this person's pressing or this person's not.
Yes.
And another advantage I've had being in research is I have an EGG in my lab. I have a flow mask where you can measure heightened flow pulse, or a pressed phonation flow pulse, which has a very low, a very low pulse. And so once you do that over the years, you start to get a really good idea of reality. What's happening. And I
think that's a great comment to make when we then reflect what a lot of my viewers might come across online, and sometimes some of the comments that are made on certain subjects here on YouTube are born out of an individual's singular experience. Now that may be garnered by some anecdotal experience with other students, but it is so important that that you don't lock anything down to being gospel just because a YouTube celebrity said it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, there is a lot of exciting research being done by ones like Brian that is, you know, really does show up some of the experiences of certain YouTube celebrities in their world of Learn to Sing. So be mindful of that. There's that word again. When you're, you know, grazing through your YouTube wall. Brian, this has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, absolute pleasure for me. I'm so thankful that you had me on.
Well, it was. I was really thrilled. I said to you earlier, and I sincerely mean it. I was really thrilled that you came on. A colleague of mine, to not embarrass them, I won't say who, but has really said of you. They think very highly of you and believe you are potentially the next Sundberg or Titzer, perhaps.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a big. And you know what? Having sat with you last year, I can see that your understanding of the voice, and perhaps more importantly, your ability to communicate in an easily accessible manner some really complex themes around voice was a real pleasure to sit under. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining us on the channel.
Well, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. It means a great deal to me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on. It was, yeah, absolute pleasure. When you said it after we had met, you know, it was such a joy to meet you. And then when you asked me, I thought, yes, some more time with Dan. Get to know Dr. Dan better. So thank you so much.
Well, Dr. Brian, it has been a great pleasure. So thank you very much for coming onto the show. There it is again, everyone. Do our guests ever let us down? They do not. We are so privileged to have this level of expertise. I cannot tell you how fortunate we all are. So don't miss another show. Make sure that you don't just hit the like button, the thumbs up button for today's video, which I know many of you are going to want to do. Make sure you hit that white bell icon so that you get notifications to let you know that we're going live and to remind you to come on and watch the live shows as well as the pre-records. As I said, we won't be back again for a few weeks until Monday the 29th of April, 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Hit the white bell icon, you won't miss it. I really do look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks. In the meantime, happy Easter to those of you who celebrate it. If you don't, please stay safe over the festive season. I very much look forward to seeing you in the next Voice Essentials live hangout. I'll see you again soon. I'm Dr. Dan. Sing well.